So a very good morning to all of you. Thank you all for taking time out today on a busy Monday morning. I'm sure you'll find worth your time as the lead authors of this study, Ms. Saloni Sachdeva from IEEFA, as well as Mr. Aditya Lola from Ember, will present the key findings from the report we are launching today, which is titled Indian States Electricity Transition. Now, you all know, India has set out ambitious climate targets. And in fact, recently, Prime Minister Modi last week said India's green energy potential is no less than a gold mine. And it is so true. And in order to achieve that, we feel decarbonization, decentralization, as well as digitalization would be regarded as a key three pillars for achieving these net zero and the climate targets that India has set out. While we are seeing a lot of progress being made, and India is actually on the right path, and India submitted its revised nationally determined contribution targets, but the absence of roadmaps and especially the concrete plans at the state level in order to achieve these targets are missing in certain states. And what we need is states cooperation as well as leadership to achieve ambitious national as well as state climate targets. Now, this study that we are launching today evaluates the preparedness of 16 Indian states and understand how they are being able to walk the electricity transition pathway. Well, you'll find most of the results to your expectation, but there were some surprises too when we were analyzing the data. When we were undertaking this study, which took us a long time, but the data availability for some key parameters was a limitation. And while this is our first attempt to understand the state performance and their preparedness for electricity transition, we have identified few more parameters for future inclusion, and more importantly, as new data becomes available, this will undergo change as this is something dynamic. I just want to kind of emphasize the fact that this is a dynamic exercise and not static. So the results that we are seeing this year could look a little different next year because the states are progressing, and on certain parameters they would be kind of scored much better. In fact, in the last 1 or 2 months alone, some states have announced big plans, or state discoms financial position has also undergone change. This will be reflected, as I said, in our next revision as we incorporate more recent data. Now, before I pass it on to Saloni and Aditya, Rose, can you launch the poll now? We just wanted to understand how all of you think which is the best performing state in terms of its electricity transition pathway. Um, Rose, are we ready to launch the poll? It's just an icebreaker. I mean, just to understand what you think is the best performing states according to you, because you will get to know at the end of the presentation. But the idea is before the results are presented in front of you, just wanted to get a sense from all of you uh, which you think is the best performing state so far. Okay, Rose, I believe it's taking time. Then in that case, I can maybe when you are ready to launch, do let us know. And in the meantime, I would request the report authors, Saloni and Aditya, to take us through the report findings. Over to you, Saloni and Aditya.
Thank you so much, Vibhuti, for setting the context, and a very good morning to everyone present. I will straight away jump into the findings and the presentation, quickly sharing my slides. If you could just please confirm if the slides are visible, Aditya.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you everyone again. So the global electricity economy is changing at a very fast pace, and India has been at the forefront of this change. As Vibhuti said, we have the G20 presidency now, and the NDC targets are already in place. A lot has happened in the past, and a lot is happening to make sure. Okay, sorry. I think the poll is live. Maybe I'll just stop for a minute and let everyone respond. Maybe as everyone is responding, I'll continue with the presentation. So, as I was saying, that a lot has happened in the past, and a lot is happening to make sure that the targets are converted into a reality. India stands fourth globally in terms of the RE installed capacity. We have 56 solar parks sanctioned in 14 states, and we all strongly believe that the implementation lies at the state level. With that aspect, we felt it is very critical to analyze where do the states stand in terms of this transition right now. And with that background, we came up with this study with the objective to develop a framework to track and measure the transition in 16 states. One second, I think, should I end the poll right now? I've just,
Saloni, I did. Uh,
okay,
is it
it was
still
just
visible?
popping up on my screen. Yeah, I've just
Go ahead.
minimized it then. Okay. So the objective of this report was to develop a framework to track and measure the transition in 16 states that Vibhuti mentioned. We wanted to highlight the barriers few states are facing and also identify untapped potential that few states are sitting on. We also believe that data has a lot of strength to empower the states with the knowledge to make much more informed decisions going forward. And hence, the plan is to take the analysis and the findings to the states and share the results with them. But in order to give a structure and boundary to the study, we are focusing on just 16 states for now. And as Vibhuti said, this is a dynamic process, and we will be happy to expand on the states also. We calculated that the combined electricity demand from these states constituted 90% of the Indian annual demand based on the CEA's data. This is looking at the last 3 financial years. But the big question being, how did we measure and what did we measure? So we came up with a four-dimensional framework, as you can see on the screen right now, and this is looking at a total of 17 parameters. This was a huge data-intensive exercise for us, and we spend a lot of time on analyzing the data, making sure that the right data set is captured, the right data sources in place, we're cleaning the data properly, and then we're analyzing the data in the right manner. The entire framework, the methodology, the weightages that you see was finalized after a rigorous discussion with sectoral experts. And we'll be happy to share the data set, the raw data set, with all of you on request. So that is also an option. Maybe before I would request Aditya to share the dimension level findings, I'll give an overall glimpse of what the four buckets are. Starting with the first one, which is decarbonization, we're trying to analyze how well the states are moving away from coal and also increasing their RE uptake. So we're looking at parameters like how well the states are utilizing their RE potential. What is the RE mix in the state's power supply? Though I will not get into a lot of parameter level details here because my co-author Aditya will be talking about those. Moving on to the second dimension, which is performance of the power system, we're looking at two aspects here. One is the DISCOM performance at the state level, and second, what is the green market participation. The third dimension, we're looking at how effectively the states are ensuring that the electricity is supplied to all the consumers. So, what are the power outages at the state level? How well the states are performing on central driven schemes like feeder segregation and smart metering. The first three dimensions are much more data intensive and focus on state level implementation, but we also felt it is critical and very important to analyze how well the states are having an intent to come up with more progressive policies. So the fourth dimension, which is policies and political commitments, focuses on that, looking at what new announcements are coming in. For example, no new coal announcement, how well the states are increasing their storage uptakes, what are the banking restrictions at the state level, and more. I will maybe stop here and request Aditya to walk you through the dimension level findings.
Thank you very much, Saloni, and good morning, everybody. I briefly caught the results of the poll. Where I think it seems like a lot of the people think Gujarat probably is a front runner. So it would be, so yeah, I'll spend a few minutes now on each of the dimensions and kind of share some of the, an analysis, some of the findings that came out of this analysis. Next slide, please, Saloni. So, so yeah, to begin with, I think I'll jump straight into it. So the first dimension that we looked at basically looked at how well the states are moving away from fossil-based power to renewable energy sources. And in this dimension, we have looked at five parameters. The first couple of parameters have got to do with renewable energy. We looked at the share of renewable energy in the state's total power generation. We looked at total installed capacity relative to the renewable energy potential of the state. We looked at coal power capacity, percentage of the coal power capacity which is older than 25 years, which is operation in the state. We looked at how clean the economic growth of each of the state is through this parameter, which looks at emissions intensity of GDP. And we also looked at state energy efficiency index, which tracks states energy efficiency efforts and progress. Before I move on, I just want to make one clarification. We are in no way suggesting that coal power plants which are older than 25 years need to be shut down right away. In the short run, to meet the peak demand, it may well be that we might need this coal capacity. But in the long run, for the states to move to 100% clean power sector, be it by 2040, by 2050, or even 2070, at some point, the transition basically will begin with the closure of older coal power plants, and that's the reason we have it included here in this analysis. So now, without further ado, I'll kind of give some interesting bits that we found. So on this dimension, what we found was that Rajasthan and Karnataka were a couple of states which did really well. Interestingly, Karnataka has been an early adopter. They had proactive policies on open access. They had policies on solar park developments and even public awareness campaigns. And as a result, right now, their share of renewable energy in the total power generation mix stands at 48%, which is the highest among all the states that we looked at. And Rajasthan, on the other hand, their progress has been more recent. It has been driven by an uptake of renewable installations in the last couple of years, and as a result, their share of renewable generation in total power mix is about 28%. So, but what's more exciting for these two states is that they still have massive untapped RE potential. Karnataka still has about 89% of RE potential, which is there to be tapped, and Rajasthan has 93% potential, which is there to be tapped. So it is exciting. And moving on, another state which was interesting was, of course, Gujarat. Gujarat has been a success story, which again, I think from the poll seems to be the pulse as well. It also has a massive untapped RE potential. It is 90% of its RE potential waiting to be converted into installed capacity. But on top of that, on the other hand, it also has about 3 gigawatts of coal capacity, which is greater than 25 years. And that's the reason you see Gujarat slightly in the middle of this chart on the left. Maharashtra also has similar challenges to Gujarat, but at a much larger scale. It is the state with the highest power demand, but it has to start utilizing its RE potential. Only 7% of its RE potential is now converted into installed capacity, and it has about 5 gigawatts of coal power capacity, which is greater than 5 gigawatts. So their transition will be at risk unless they kind of manage these two aspects. Speaking of age of coal fleet, Uttar Pradesh's coal fleet is probably the oldest among all the states that we've looked at. 31% of their coal capacity is actually older than 25 years old. On the other end of the spectrum, Haryana doesn't have any coal power plant which is older than 25 years, so to speak. And I'd like to end the slide by talking about three states, Chhattisgarh, West Bengal, and Odisha. They not only have to utilize more of their RE potential and increase their renewable energy share in the power mix, but they also need to improve their energy efficiency efforts. For Chhattisgarh, there is an added problem in the sense that their economy is pretty much dependent on coal, and as a result, decoupling its economy from emissions, it is going to be a task, and special care actually is required to make sure that their economic growth is driven more cleanly going forward. Next slide, please. Yeah, the next dimension that we've looked at is something which looks at the ability of the states to create green market pulls. Here we looked at 4 parameters. We looked at Niti Aayog's DISCOM performance rating. We looked at states' outstanding payments to power generators. We looked at the states' participation in green day-ahead markets, and we looked at their progress on their renewable energy targets under the 175 gigawatt national target by end of 2022. And what we found here was that Karnataka again was performing well. Their performance on this dimension was mainly driven by the fact that they have had the largest, highest transactions on Green Day Ahead market ever since its launch in October 2021, and because of that, they scored quite high. On top of that, I have actually reduced the outstanding payments to power generators from about 85% in March of 2018 to 64% in March of 2022. On top of that, it is also one of the 4 states to have actually met their renewable energy installed capacity target for end of 2022. Their target was around 14.8 gigawatts, and they are somewhere around 16.4 gigawatts at the moment. You'll see that Gujarat and also Punjab are 2 other states which also scored fairly well on this dimension. That was mainly because they had good DISCOM ratings on the Niti Aayog SECI score. They kind of got scored down a little bit because their participation in GDAM was actually minimal. One thing to note here is that Punjab's performance in the recent years, as per the PFC DISCOM rating report, has actually deteriorated. So in the next version, you'll probably see Punjab's score kind of going a little down. Now I'd like to kind of talk about 2 states which have introduced various reforms in the recent years, Rajasthan and Maharashtra. So those reforms are ongoing, but their overall score on this dimension was held back because of their low DISCOM ratings and their limited GDAM participation, which kind of was the theme for most of the states on this dimension. On top of that, the states that you're seeing in the middle of the chart, which is Haryana, Delhi, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu, they also showed a trend in reducing their outstanding payments to power generators from their DISCOMs in the recent years. So yeah, there is progress. So some states are actually in the right trajectory, and like it was pointed out before, this ranking is going to be a dynamic ranking, and it will be updated as and when data becomes available. So I'd like to end this slide by talking about West Bengal and Madhya Pradesh. They do have a lot of work to do across all the parameters to improve the performance of their power system. West Bengal in specific can look to reduce their outstanding payment. Their DISCOMs can look to reduce their outstanding payments to the power generator. Next slide. In this dimension, the 3rd dimension, we looked at how prepared the states are in terms of transitioning to a 100% clean power sector while ensuring reliable electricity supply. Here we've considered quality of power supply, but by that what I mean is that we looked at a percentage of power shortages versus relative to the total power requirement of the state in the last financial year. We looked at feeder segregation targets under the UDAY scheme. We looked at progress on smart meter targets under the National Smart Mission. And we also looked at electricity intensity of GDP, which is a measure of how efficiently electricity is being used to generate economic growth. And on this dimension, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and Gujarat, all of them performed well. And they performed well on the back of the fact that all of them met 100% of their feeder segregation targets and 100% of their sanctioned smart meter targets. So Gujarat, again, one of the best performers that we found in the analysis. Their score was slightly bumped down because of the fact that they saw a relatively high power shortage in the last financial year. This was mainly because of sudden rise in temperatures and logistical issues when it came to coal supply and the volatile in global energy prices, especially coal prices. Speaking of power shortages, Rajasthan actually had the highest power shortage in absolute terms, about 490 million units last year. And on top of that, they've only met 39% of their feeder segregation target and 79% of their smart sanctioned smart metering target, because of which you see Rajasthan in the lower half of the chart on your left. On feeder segregation, two states which we found interesting were Tamil Nadu and Telangana. They performed well in most parameters, but they made the least progress when it came to feeder segregation, which overall kind of bumped down their scores on this dimension. One interesting state that we found on this dimension was Bihar. Bihar actually performed the best when it came to feeder segregation. It had good data available and everything. But overall performance has been dragged down because of lack of performance on the other parameters. So it had the highest power shortages. 1.1% of the power requirement last year could not be met. And on top of that, they installed only 45% of their smart metering. So as a result of all this, on the overall dimension, it kind of scored a little lower than the other states considered. Next slide, please. And in the final dimension, what we've looked at is the intent of the states from a policy and a political commitment point of view, to move to a cleaner, power system. The first parameter we looked at was was basically looking at if the states had any no new coal announcements, if they're building any coal, if there is a coal power plant under construction or on pre-construction stages and things like that. That would risk the state into a lock-in. We looked at their battery, how their proclivity to new battery storage pilot projects, and how they're open to such projects. We also kind of had a consideration for the circular economy side of the things, looking at their ability to recycle some of the battery waste and solar waste that is going to come out in the future with increased renewables. And then looked at how favorable the banking provisions are in each of the states for RE uptake. And in this dimension, we found that Haryana and Gujarat did well. So Haryana, it had the highest e-waste and battery waste recycling capacity of about 14 kgs per capita at the moment. And they also were not building any new coal power plants. There was no coal power plant in the pipeline as per the Global Energy Monitor data. Gujarat, on the other hand, it had the most grid level battery storage project, because of which it scored well. And on top of that, along with Karnataka, Gujarat has also announced no new coal power plant policy. So because of this, Gujarat has done well. Talking about banking provisions, we found that Rajasthan, Maharashtra, and Punjab, these three states did have progressive banking provisions, which will hold them in good stead going forward. And yeah, so talking about interesting states that we found on this dimension level analysis was Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu is facing a new coal lock-in risk. It has about 9 gigawatts of coal power plants in pipeline, 5 gigawatts under construction, and about 4 gigawatts in pre-construction stages. And on top of that, it also needs some favorable banking provisions to ramp up RE. So ramping up RE and reducing reliance on new coal, I think that is going to be the thing which the Tamil Nadu needs to focus on. To end with, I'd like to talk about Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, and Telangana. They are the other states which they need a plan to avoid coal power lock-in. So most of the states which have plans to build new coal power plants, I think they are at a risk of this lock-in, and there is the need for that to be reevaluated. Maybe I'll stop there. I know I've thrown a lot of headlines at you, so I'll just stop there and give it back to Saloni. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aditya. And very quickly, what I will now do is try to summarize what Aditya said. We acknowledge, though, that a lot of states are already taking a lot of efforts to walk the electricity transition pathway, and we have highlighted few states who need further support. What this slide does is bring together all the dimensions together and shows how the positioning of each state is changing from one dimension to another, and also within the dimension, how far the state's performance is relative to each other. For example, if I quickly talk about dimension 3, you see most of the states are green in color. So the states are performing well relative to other in under this dimension. And one of the reason to that could be that the parameters considered under dimension 3 are majorly centrally driven. For example, feeder segregation and smart metering. So a lot of central support is being given by the states to enhance their performance. Whereas if we look at dimension 1 and see the change between Karnataka to Chhattisgarh and West Bengal, we see how far Karnataka's performance on decarbonization is from Chhattisgarh and West Bengal. Now, if we see across the dimensions, Karnataka, as Aditya iterated, is the only state that scored well across the dimensions, be it decarbonizing its power sector, its performance under the power, improving its power infrastructure, and Karnataka also has progressive policies in place. Gujarat is a little behind Karnataka, as also Aditya pointed out that Gujarat has its coal fleet, which is approximately 19% still, which has more than 25 years of age. So that brought Gujarat's under the mid-table in decarbonization bucket, and hence its performance reduced a little bit. If I talk about states like Rajasthan and Tamil Nadu, who are often considered pioneers of renewable energy and power sector reforms, they did not perform consistently under the 4 dimensions, as you can see. Rajasthan has performed really well under the first bucket, which is decarbonizing, but it further requires efforts to increase its power infrastructure and make it much more efficient and ready for more RE uptake. If you look at states like UP, West Bengal, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, you see their performance is not up to the mark in all the 4 dimensions. Though one positive step very recently from Uttar Pradesh has been that the state has announced approximately 65 crores to be installed or used for revamping their distribution infrastructure. So other states should maybe follow the suit of UP and make efforts to make their power infrastructure and strengthen their power infrastructure more. States also need to take more effort to decarbonize their power sector, reduce dependency on coal, and increase RE uptake. What I will again do is maybe based on these dimension level findings, quickly jump to the recommendation slide. Though I will encourage all of you to please go through the report and look at the state level findings and read through the recommendation. But at a very high level, what we're recommending is a 4 set of recommendations. Starting with states need to take multi-dimensional efforts to ensure effective and sustained electricity transition. So looking at both decarbonizing the supply side and ensuring that the demand side is much more efficient. The state also need to develop more storage solutions, and this should be technology agnostic, be it pump hydro, large-scale storage projects, or behind the meter. We also strongly believe that states that are high in RE and have high RE potential should act as export hubs for the states that do not have that much of RE potential. And this can happen through green market participation. So this brings me to the second recommendation, that is increasing the green market participation at the state level. Karnataka was the only state which had 10% of its entire short-term market quantum coming from green GDAM, which is Green Day Ahead Market Contribution, and other states were not performing well under this parameter. So that needs to be improved going forward. Also, states need to make efforts to remove banking restrictions and allow much more progressive settlement periods, not just daily, but monthly and annually, along with developing innovative bilateral financial markets. The third recommendation was a challenge that we faced while doing the study was accurate data availability. So states need to improve data availability and data transparency and ensure that right data is available to conduct such studies. One possible recommendation could be using more digitization tools to ensure that state level data is available going forward. Last but not the least, bridging the gap between intent and implementation. We believe that a lot of states are coming up with progressive policies, but then there is a conflict. For example, states are announcing no new coal, but they already have coal plants that are in pre-construction and construction stages. So that kind of conflict needs to be resolved. States should also be better prepared for handling the upcoming clean tech waste, because the transition has to be much more futuristic looking. So the solar panel waste, the battery waste, or the e-waste that will be coming in the near future, the states need to be better prepared for that. So these were the high level recommendation. I will also reiterate again and close my slides by saying that this is the first step we took to track, monitor, and analyze the data. And we'll be happy to get the feedback today and later on to add more parameters, come up with updated analysis going forward. I would also like to thank all of you to give your eyes and ears to the presentation, and now hand over to Vibhuti to initiate the panel discussion.
Thank you, both Saloni and Aditya. It is interesting to see how Karnataka and even Gujarat, I would say, made most progress towards clean electricity transition. And Haryana and Punjab, are best positioned to further this transition. And we did also hear that Rajasthan and Tamil Nadu have also demonstrated good progress, but it's not uniform across all areas. So while certain states have performed well under some dimensions, but there are other dimensions which they need to further improve upon. We also heard how some states' discom financial health has deteriorated since the data that we used in our analysis, so which will be updated, while for others, payment owed to generators has gone down, which makes it investing in renewable energy in those states less risky. So there is a lot of feedback that can be taken by different kind of stakeholders, especially investors and developers. Quickly, let me see. Okay, can you all see the poll results? Perfect.
Yep.
Okay, so most of you were close. So 60% of the audience, chose Gujarat. So I would say we can clearly say Karnataka, while was best positioned, even Gujarat demonstrated good progress on the energy transition. So yeah, I think every time we think since Gujarat financial health is better than all the other states, it's the best position as far as electricity transition is concerned. But Karnataka clearly, based on our analysis, was the best performing state. And Bihar, okay, who chose Bihar? So there is one individual who even felt Bihar could be the best performing states. Great, interesting results. Thank you. Now, I will move on to the next part of the agenda, which is the panel discussion. But before we move on, some housekeeping points. So if you have any questions on the report, I can see some questions have already started coming in. So I would request both Saloni and Aditya if they can start responding. But if there are any questions which are unanswered, we'll definitely take up in the end. And if you also have any questions for any of the panelists after the panel discussion, please do mention it in the Q&A. And if it is directed to any of the particular speaker or presenter, the report author, then please specify that. And as I said, we'll try and take up as many questions which are still unanswered at the end. And for the journalists, if you are writing stories and if you want to quote any of the speakers or the panelists, would encourage all of you to get your quotes once verified by those individuals. That's a small request to the journalists who are listening to us today. Now, moving on, I would now like to invite all our panelists. We have today Mr. Abhishek Ranjan, who is a power sector expert with over 2 decades of industry experience and has led a number of initiatives to fasten the adoption of rooftop solar PV specifically, as well as electric vehicles and also on the battery energy storage, along generally with the greening of the utility of power portfolio. We also have Mr. Srinivas Krishnaswamy, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Vasudha Foundation, which is a not-for-profit think tank. He has been actively involved in conceptualizing and designing a number of pioneering and unique projects in the clean energy and climate policy space. We also have Ms. Aarti Khosla, who will be joining us shortly. She is the founder director of Climate Trends with over 20 years of experience working as a communicator. The last 13 of which have been dedicated to creating knowledge awareness as well as capacity on climate and environment related issues in India. And last but not the least, we have Ms. Shalu Agarwal, who is a senior program lead at CW, working on residential energy access, demand side management, and power sector reforms. So thank you all for joining today. Saloni, if you can stop sharing your screen. And oh, Aarti has also joined. Great. I would request all the panelists to please put your video on. Great, thank you. Mr. Ranjan, are you there with us? I can see you.
Yeah, hi,
First
Mani.
of all, hi, good morning. Uh, Firstly, thank you so much. You have been one of the reviewers as well as, helped us in framing the methodology for this report. So I would really like to thank you again for the contribution and efforts that you have been made for this study along with us. Mr. Ranjan, I'll start with you. You heard from both Saloni and Aditya that there are many states which have not utilized their renewable energy potential to the fullest. What, according to you, are the barriers impeding the states from utilizing their renewable energy potential? In fact, there's this opportunity, especially for renewable energy rich states, to become an export hub and participate more in green market mechanisms, which can help those states not only meet their own renewable energy targets, but also for other states as well. But the progress, as the report suggests, the progress has been limited only to a few states. What do you think might encourage these states to act on this opportunity? So two questions, the barriers and how do you encourage these more RE states to become more export hubs?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Vibhuti, and congratulations for this report. Very insightful and the first of its kind in India. I can see this. Okay, so we see CEA recently came out with a transmission connectivity plan for renewable energy connectivity of up to 500 gigawatt, which is planned by a country by 2030. Okay, and they have talked about 7 RE-rich states and where they have given a transmission plan. So to answer your query, some of the states, for example, Gujarat and Rajasthan, they have been bringing their own tenders and RFPs for connectivity of solar, wind, or solar and wind hybrid altogether. Okay, but other states like Karnataka, Telangana, Andhra, for example, Tamil Nadu, they have not been very much forthcoming in bringing out the tenders, and so some of the reasons have already been captured in the report. For example, they have a legacy list of the PPAs, maybe thermal, maybe that is fossil or maybe non-fossil, which is not meeting up with their currently, demand requirements. Second is lack of planning in terms of resource adequacy in the next future. Say, for example, 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line, what is the kind of resource adequacy which is there? All of them wouldn't have planned for the lack of such resource adequacy guideline, which now is being proposed by the central government. The CA guidelines have come up, draft ones, and it is being proposed as a mandate in the Indian Electricity Grid Code regulations as well. Resource adequacy has to be now planned by the states. So, which is absent today as a enforcer, and that's why one of the reasons is that. Now, the next point is what are the suitable business models? So, for example, states like GOVNL, etc., they have very strong, tendering capabilities and other enablers. So, for example, presence of strong STU net connectivity so that intra-state offtake of the power is very much enabled. Now, Gujarat is also trying to set up that in online. So, I'm sorry, the Gujarat and Karnataka is also trying to set up on that lines. Apart from that, the credit worthiness of the state. So these factors are enabling discovery of a very competitive tariff. But going forward, what needs to be done is evolve other business models in the say, like, for example, pure vanilla solar or wind may not be, good for the health of even these RE-rich states or as export hubs. So even non-RE rich states like North Indian states, except Rajasthan, what I would say, which are demand centers, and they would devise certain RFPs, which is load following and round the clock, and which would mean that these constructs would have to be woven across the state. So, for example, only deploying solar or wind in Gujarat will not solve their purpose. Might have to go for deployment of wind and solar, especially wind across states. So that is going to lead to a holistic development of RE potential and enabling these states to become export hubs. Today, for example, there was another study which told that Gujarat is a net importer of electricity from the grid today. One of the studies, I think it was IDAM's study, which they have done using Plexos. Very recently, they have released that. Now, that situation is going to reverse if the CTU connectivity, power which can be evacuated out of the state is going to be good. In a nutshell, CTU connectivity or power evacuation is very much important, which is an impediment now. But then the CA has come out with some of these plans, as we see. If it fructify, nothing like that. Second is these states would have to do their own resource adequacy and do the planning for the next 5 years or 10 years, maybe up to 2030, and see what is their own domestic requirement vis-a-vis other states which are non-RE rich, and they can also plan in a business model way where around the clock load following constructs can enable that. And third is obviously the inside state STU capability, which is also a problem. So STU connectivity is a problem, which is not, coming out with this. Finally, the strengthening of the grid for integration of RE is another challenge which they are facing, especially Rajasthan and Gujarat, basically for loss of generation, which is creating a lot of troubles for Grid India as well, which has been highlighted earlier in the meetings. So that also needs a holistic view in terms of usage of storage, not only in the energy construct, but also as an ancillary construct. More about it later.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Ranjan, for highlighting some of the reasons for the bottleneck and why I think clearly it is coming out that CTU as well as the STU connectivity, the preparedness of the DISCOMs to handle more and more RE will be critical, and transmission will play a big role, not only for its own to meet its own demand, but for others to meet demands for other states. And clearly, the other thing that you pointed out, that plain vanilla contracts are, I believe, thing of the past. And I think more and more hybrid tenders is what we are observing, whether it's to meet RTC or even to meet its peak demand, especially. And storage can definitely play a big role. So just coming, I mean, as a follow-up question, given you highlighted RE grid integration as a big issue as well. I mean, preparing the grid for handling more and more grid integrations. Storage solutions are no more a choice, but necessity for better integration of renewables. So as well as for peak demand management and load balancing. So we are seeing increasingly that more and more tenders by SECI and NTPC are coming for grid scale storage. According to you, what role will different storage solutions play when, the share of RE, when it goes even higher to 50%? So now it's quite manageable because the share of RE is to a point where it can be easily managed. But as more and more RE gets added, what kind of storage needs would be required in India?
Sure. So when you talk about the need of the storage, obviously the need for the flexibility, storage is a source of flexibility. So flexibility needs are going to amplify and multiply as in when we go ahead in terms of integrating RE today. In energy terms, RE contributes about 11-12%. But by 2030, we expect at least 50% of it coming from, in capacity terms, from the non-fossil sources as per the government targets. Now, and if you go to the year 2050 or 2070, it is going to go higher only. The point is, if you talk about the CA's report of optimal fuel mix for a green grid, which came out, I think, in 2020 or 2021. It talks about 27 gigawatt of storage. I'm not talking about the battery storage. It can be any storage, irrespective of the technology, pump storage or battery storage or mechanical storage, whatever it is. And by 2030, and they expect that by 2027, the need for the storage will amplify. And that's what we see in kind of preparations of capability building by these organizations, like, for example, NTPC in the public sector, or say Greenco in the private sector, who are trying to build these capabilities and selling them as capability. Okay, so the model which is going around right now is to sell this as a capacity. So rupees per megawatt per month kind of tariff, and use it subjected to the technical constraints in terms of number of cycles and ramp up and ramp down rates for, say, for example, PSPs or for battery energy storage, depending upon the chemistry. Okay, so what these RE solution providers are doing is, they are garnering the support of such capabilities to design efficient RE solutions as and when they arise. So, for example, the PSPs will take time to be online. Okay, so one Pinnapuram of site of Greenco, which is in the public domain, so it might come up in the next 2 years. And similarly, many RE developers are scouting for such capabilities. Now, if you talk about what kind and where it should be deployed, it's not between BESS and PSP, it is both BESS and PSP, because as I said, the storage would be required for two cases. One is a long duration storage or a medium duration storage as an energy construct. Okay, and the second is a very ultra short or short duration storage where it is being used for ancillary services or intraday balancing of the renewables. Suppose there are fluctuations and you are not able to balance because of the inaccuracy in your intraday RE generation forecast. Right. So both the areas you see there are multiple tenders, as you said. For example, one of them was 500 megawatt, 1000 megawatt hour by SECI as a standalone storage, but connected to one of the CTU injection points in Rajasthan. Now, the idea of this is to utilize this as a balancer and also absorber of the excess RE energy, which is being injected at the same CTU injection point. There could be PSPs located in geographically areas, may not be in load centers or maybe in the load centers. And the idea is to utilize their long duration storage to meet the load profile, be it, as you said, the peak power, off-peak power, or so the load profile on a round-the-clock basis, which will take care of both off-peak, peaks, normal, everything. So load falling means everything. So in a nutshell, the storage, irrespective of their technology, they are going to play an important role. So battery energy storage has an advantage of being deployed anywhere, and which is going to help in augmenting and planning transmission in a better way. And that's why battery storage is going to be and it has already been designated as one of the transmission planning element. The
Right.
PSPs, for example, would be energy storage or energy solution provider, maybe 6 to 8 hours of storage, and which is very important for meeting out the diurnal variations as well as short seasonal variations as well in the the demand basically. So both have an important role to play, and yes, and the number is going to be anyway going upwards.
Right. Thanks. I think that also points out to the point you raised earlier. The states need to start having a proper resource adequacy, and that's when they'll identify whether how much of long duration storage is required for balancing or meeting their demand in a much more sustainable fashion, or how much of battery storage needs to come into play, the role of flexibility to help integration of renewable energy better. Great. Thank you, Mr. Ranjan. Shalu, I'll move to you next. Leveraging your experience of working with several states, how can these states be nudged to adopt more measures to accelerate the transition? And when you are talking about not only from the greening of the supply side, but also, what actions are needed to make the demand more efficient?
Thank you, Vibhuti. Again, I resonate with Mr. Ranjan's thoughts that it's a very interesting report, and especially the framework that you've come up with, because otherwise we often tend to focus on one or two parameters while judging the state's progress. So this allows, a more comprehensive canvas, even though, some of the parameters can be always, up for debate, and no frameworks are perfect ever. But on your question, I think like when it comes to energy transition at the state level, the important aspect is that states are responsible, more directly responsible to their populations, right, well-being. And so the narrative that works at the state level, which can, drive them towards transition, is very different from what works at the national or the international level. So to give you an example, like we've been closely working with the state of Rajasthan in drafting, helping them draft a long-term energy policy that looks up to 2050 with clear milestones and sector-specific deliverables. It's under a drafting process at the moment. But the main driver for this policy, for instance, is the states need to provide reliable and affordable supply to its people, while also tapping the, vast renewable energy potential that the state has, and in the process generate local employment, but also attract investment. So the resultant lower emissions that the transition will lead to is seen as a co-benefit when it comes to the states, not as the primary driver. So really, what is needed to nudge the state is to work with them to demonstrate clear transition pathways that are aligned with the state's context and also the socio-political imperatives. And even the similar approach, worked in case of Jharkhand again, where CW worked with them in drafting an ambitious solar policy. And now this is a state which is abundance of coal, right? So again, it is less about reducing emissions, even though that also happens, but more about how the state can see it as a growth opportunity. But beyond this, over time, we're also learning that states need a lot of hand-holding support in translating these policies into action, which would also mean then, think tanks, which are, often working from Delhi so far, they need to become action tanks, need to get their hands dirty and start, supporting the states in building capacity, because by now, most people know what needs to be done. It is really the question of how do you do it. And then we are seeing, more and more institutions now going to the states and it's going to be a learning exercise for even, people working on the policy to now move into the action arena, right? And finally, I think the last nudge that the states would need is with respect to the investment, or rather than the nudge, more support. Because we're beyond the point when RE can be just said to be the cheapest resource, because the fact that as more RE gets into the grid, the cost of integration has started to hit the states. And of course, Mr. Ranjan also talked about it briefly. And so how can the center mobilize investments into the technologies that will help states, incorporate or absorb so much RE into the grid will become more and more important. It cannot be just left to the states to handle it, especially the ones who have very high RE potential. And you also asked about, okay, what more can be done on the demand efficiency side? Glad that you asked that question, because often otherwise, it doesn't even enter such conversations. We tend to equal decarbonization with more RE.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons is it's not the most glamorous space, right? When you inaugurate a big solar plant, it makes headlines, but it doesn't happen when you're focusing on energy efficiency, which is very distributed, and requires a lot of stakeholder movement, and then also doesn't have scale at that level. So in terms of what can be done going beyond the specifics, the challenge of scale, I think, needs to be tackled through more capable institutions, which is a major barrier when it comes to the states. So you have, say, ECBC rules and guidelines, but there's not enough capacity to enforce them, or there are not enough incentives for driving their uptake. Similarly, so these are the two things that need more focus rather than
just new announcements on what more can be done, because unless there are institutions and people to actually see them through, it'll be difficult to see action on the demand flexibility, demand side management front. And then the second challenge, which is efficiency not being glamorous enough for the political executive to focus on. Um, Again, I don't know what's the right answer, but probably Mission Life, which has been announced by the Prime Minister. Maybe if it could be converted into a non-partisan social campaign where center and state come together to really socialize and take the message to all Indian homes. That's where we'll start looking at it as part of sustainable lifestyles movement, rather than multiple activities that a consumer has to do, be it switching off fans, switching to different efficient motors, lights, and whatnot. So it doesn't end. Like unlike solar, it's just one thing that you've put on rooftop, but efficiency is everywhere. So how do you make it into the habit? So I'll pause here. Thank you.
Yeah, I know it's a low-hanging fruit, but still it is not playing that kind of a role. It's less glamorous. And how do we make it more glamorous is something I think we at CSOs needs to bring in more and more. Programs are there, but again, helping states, as you pointed out very correctly, that capacity building at state level needs to be there, because India does have a lot of very progressive policies, but converting those policies into action and actionable item at different states, which kind of aligns with another point that you made was different states have different goals. And how do you kind of make those central policies align with their state level goals? That is very, very critical, and converting into more and more actionable items. So I think with this, I would now uh, move to Shrini, who has been working on the data related platform for quite some time. Shrini, as you would have listened that, one of the biggest challenges for this kind of study was availability, readability, and more importantly, accuracy of the data. So, there were times when we got similar data from different sources, which were like just not matching with each other. So according to you, can you highlight how states can be nudged to capture, track, and update data to ensure that the transition is more transparent? You may also, you have been developing one of the biggest climate dashboards. Maybe throw some light, talk about very briefly on the kind of data that is being captured, and how do you think, based on some of the analysis that we have undertaken, can be captured over there as well? And also, just to highlight for all the listeners, the data set would be available for the studies for everybody to kind of play around and see. All the data set will also be kind of provided on our website. Over to you, Shrini.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vibhuti, and a very good morning to all of you. At the outset, Vibhuti and team, this is a wonderful report. Thanks so much for bringing it out, and it's also very timely. I should, before I get into the actual crux of the question that you asked, I just want to mention that there are a lot of data and a lot of information that you sort of, that came out of the report resonates with the kind of data that we already have. And then so many cases, for example, we can very, very clearly see as to where you see and how you see Karnataka doing very well, and Gujarat, following very closely behind, and so on. And we have all the numbers to actually corroborate the kind of findings that you have across the multiple dimensions. Now, and again, just to give an example, but one thing that I would like to sort of highlight before I get into the data bit is that, and as the previous speakers have also alluded to, the biggest thing that one will have to look into is, while we do the ranking of states, but we must be a little careful to sort of, factor in that a lot of actions, that is taken, that happens at the ground level, should not be construed, or a lot of inaction, so to speak, should not be construed as a lack of willingness of the state to go in for an energy transition. It could largely be due to the circumstances and state circumstances. So, for example, let me take the example of Karnataka versus UP. Just a small example. Karnataka, obviously, number one on the renewable energy front, with close to about 20 gigawatts of renewables, including hydro, constituting close to 67%, as opposed to UP, which is just 17%, including hydro, right? But then one should also take into consideration that Karnataka is endowed with, both wind and solar as well as hydro. And if you look at both small and large hydro, it forms a good chunk. Whereas UP, on the other hand, there's no wind and it's only solar, and it's just about 17%, and land is also an issue. So there are these issues but then the new UP policy, the solar policy 2022 is fairly ambitious and looks at 22 gigawatts by 2026-27. So I would say that there is a willingness to act, but how soon will they be able to translate these targets into actions remains to be seen. Now, coming specific to your question on data, Vibhuti, yes, that has always been a challenge. I would sort of put it in sort of two buckets. One is the data availability per se, and another one is the lack of data. Now, talking of data availability per se, there's a fair amount of data that is available today, unlike 4 years back or 5 years back with a number of dashboards. But unfortunately, most of this data is available in silos, in very specific dashboards, and does not necessarily integrate or does not necessarily present a holistic picture. So, for example, you have CEA coming up with just daily generation and generation-related data that's available, but the data that CEA puts out and the data that POSICO puts out are not necessarily the same. Even for the same parameters, you have some minor differences. And the methodology as to why that is, nobody knows, or it's not put out in public domain. There are data sets that's available at that's put out by various agencies, by various ministries, various line departments, and so on. And again, they are all very, very specific to their departments or their specific issue areas. All right. Number two, a lot of the data sets are not available in very easily readable form, or easily, what shall I say, a form that you can play with the numbers. So a lot of them are either PDF reports, and unfortunately, some of them are even scanned. So, for example, if you want a DISCOM related data, one will have to go through a number of tariff orders and tariff petitions. You don't get the data directly in any dashboard, unfortunately, till now. Similarly, if you're looking at the cross-sectoral linkages, so you're looking at the impact of water on the power sector, or impact on the biodiversity on the power sector, or vice versa, you don't have that kind of information. So, for example, information on biodiversity is available at various sites related to the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and similarly, water-related data is on the Central Groundwater Commission, and so on and so forth. So that kind of how do you draw the interlinkages between, say, for example, the impact of water on power sector, or the power sector on water? That kind of data is not available in one place. So to address that, 4 years, 5 years back, what we did was we came up with a very ambitious program to set up a dashboard called the Vasudha-Power.in. So the Vasudha-Power.in was sort of the first of the precursor of, I would say, a more advanced dashboard that I'll come to in a minute. The Vasudha Power started off by capturing data for the entire power sector value chain and bringing together near real-time data, comprehensive data across the entire power sector value chain, and granular data, so data that distills down to the DISCOM level for parameters that we could get the DISCOM level data from. So it's sort of married data from multiple data sources, from the CA to the POSICOs to the Central Groundwater Commission to the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, etc., etc., etc. The volume 2, or the next version of that, is something that should be launched in about 10 days' time. That is called the ICED, the India Climate and Energy Dashboard. The ICED is an advanced version of Vasudha Power, and this is something that we're doing in partnership with NITI Aayog. And as the title itself says, India Climate Energy Dashboard, it brings together data across the energy value chain. So Vasudha Power is only the power sector value chain. Now this is the entire energy value chain. It brings together data from the entire climate space, so includes climate variability, which means that one can do a comparison between the impact on power sector or the impact of temperature rise on the power sector, demand, etc., etc. So it also captures climate variability data, rainfall and temperature data across a period of almost 100 years now. So from 1900 on a daily basis across 800 weather stations of India that the IMD has. It brings in data on emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, though right now it is restricted to the GHG emissions that's put out in the BUR, the NATCOM 1, 2, and the BURs 1, 2, and 3 reports, and not necessarily other private data, but that's something that we're working with NITI Aayog to also include. And then it also brings together key economic indicators like GDP, GSDP, and so on and so forth. The whole idea is to get a comprehensive picture of the energy sector as a whole and the impacts of various other key parameters like economic indicators and climate data and so on, to give a holistic picture of the energy scenario as a whole. The whole idea is that this portal, which is easy to access, near real-time, granular, which also, again, like I said, goes up to distills down to not just discoms, but also even district level data. And importantly, no paywalls. Anybody can, and easy download. So you can just click a button and download all the sheets and play with the sheets. Nothing to pay, not a single dime to pay for. So this should be long. And again, all credible data. And also, since we also hope to have a lot of government users, particularly state governments, to use this data extensively, this is also on a NIC server, which means that there is that, what you call, the added comfort of the safety, so to speak. So this, we hope to launch it in another week, 10 days time. It's in near readiness. And unfortunately, at this point in time, I can't share the website because it's still not launched and it's password protected. But hopefully in a week's time, I would be able to share the data. And then one quick point, last point. We also want to do this similar kind of exercise, creating state level dashboards and integrating the state level dashboard with the ICED. Right now, as I said, the ICED does have data at the state level and the districtcom level and the district level, but there are certain data that is very specific to state that we also are looking to set up state level dashboard. And this is something that NITI Aayog has been in talks with various states and with us. And so that work should also start soon. And hopefully that will then help to address the data gaps that Saloni and others sort of brought out in the report. I'll stop here for now.
Thanks, Srini. We are all waiting for the dashboard to be launched because we know much more granular data will be available. And hopefully this whole exercise, as you said, while the data might be existing, but they are also scattered. So this kind of analysis, what we tried to do was to bring that information together, have a proper methodology to assess how the states are faring on their energy transition pathway. So I think that kind of analysis is also required, not just data, but having dashboards which are more interactive. I think I did see a version and I was really kind of quite bogged by the level of detail analysis that you are gonna come up with. So really looking forward to the dashboard.
Thank you.
And I believe it will solve a lot of people problem in gathering the data and avoid duplication of effort for a lot of us.
Hopefully,
Thanks.
yes.
Okay. Aarti, I know you have been really silent for long. Now, from your experience of working on the communication piece of the transition, just wanted to understand how willing and proactive the states are to absorb findings from studies like ours. And more importantly, what communication strategies and platforms should be explored to strengthen state level engagements and participation. Shalu, in her remark, did highlight, we have to work along with states. But from comms perspective, what's your experience has been?
Thanks very much, and very nice to hear everybody's insights, and well done on the report. It's quite detailed and well produced. A couple of things which probably will not come as a surprise to this group, but I will say them nonetheless because of our experience of working with all of you, but also working just pushing the energy narrative more broadly. And I think the one thing that I do want to say at the beginning is that the way energy communications is seen is two ends of the spectrum. On the one hand, it's a lot of international energy diplomacy conversations, which push the boundaries of how India should be acting more, taking up large renewable targets, and essentially, the good ambitions that we've put forward on the side of climate ambition. But on the other hand, there is, and that's the elite media play. But on the other hand, as some of you have already pointed out, the narratives at the state level are really local. The challenges are quite peculiar. And that does not meet always what happens at the international fora and the challenges that the states feel, because the narratives at the state level are essentially about growth, about development, about co-benefits, and now even possibly about just transition as well. And I will talk about that, a little bit later, because I feel that just bringing the elements of transition and making that, breaking that down is one way in which we can link the elite media play as well as the local and the state and regional media, which sometimes don't tend to link with each other. So I think that's clearly one point, that the center's priorities are largely led by geopolitical concerns, and energy is a diplomacy issue, and states are driven by local realities. And in your report also, when you look at the case of Tamil Nadu, which is high renewables, and yet I think your parameters point out that grid stability is an issue, and concerns around RE being backed down if it can't be dispatched. And similarly, if you look at Gujarat, a state like that, which was almost the first one or the second one, I think, first one to announce no new coal, but traditionally high performing if you look at discom performance and all of that, but still incapable of closing old coal power plants. And there is something about political economy there which the media does not always capture. So there is a lot of international discussion, for instance, about powering past coal, moving away from coal. But if you look at the ground realities, things are really very, very different. Coming to coal, I also wanted to talk a little bit, because it has been such a touchy and a sensitive subject, but at the same time dominates a lot of the media landscape, as well as the energy conversations, and it comes out in every kind of rankings that happen and all kinds of conversations. But if you look at how the media writes about it or will pick it up, for example, we saw last year at the time of heat stress. I mean, it is very rare that you have a climate emergency as a heat stress completely being bundled into what is a coal crisis, and then the cascade implications of importing more coal and increasing domestic mining and all of this. And the media has loved to report about it. So I think it's also being able to play to the news spec. And it feels to me that all of the think tanks and organizations and researchers who are doing all the good work also need to be able to at every moment translate their findings and their analysis into something which makes relevant news spec, because otherwise we are only chasing that narrative. The government has now, for example, you're just chasing or following what has already happened in terms of a policy or a notification, rather than talking about it proactively. And I think that proactive conversation, especially on tricky elements of transition, are good. There was a point made on energy efficiency before and life that Shalu said, and I do agree with that. That the communications that are done by the CSOs are really focused on the supply side, and we all know traditionally. When we were talking of energy conservation, the demand side was the thing, but suddenly it lost its flavor in the middle due to the focus on mitigation and all of that. And it's not that those measures haven't succeeded. We have examples of the LED scheme, we have examples of the star rating scheme, and we know what it takes to really make a push towards having some kind of concrete public engagement. And I do think that with the way the Indian government is now looking at life as not just a way to create awareness, but also to do something measurable, having elements of some exact ways on which consumers or people can engage might not be a bad idea. And it just feels that that could be something that could be a plus point going forward in future. In terms of what needs to be done, I mean, sometimes when you, for example, I was looking at a very specific example. Sometimes when you look at renewable energy media narrative, there is a lot of narrative that comes, for example, on large scale wind solar projects coming at loggerheads with communities. We don't need to talk too much about it here, but I do think that while on the one hand, solidarity is really important, RE sector, will also have to move ahead. So we have to find that balance that exists in the narrative between energy justice, as you may call it, but also the ability of the renewable sector to be able to oversee such a transition. Two last points. One on just transition. This is not really a session on just transition and how it has captured the imagination of climate and energy campaigners at this moment, but some narratives have a lot of appeal internationally, and the way the international media is very advanced and sophisticated in talking about energy, it feels like we have to be able to capture the sentiment around just transition to channelize it in a way that it works for India. Right now, we're only talking about transition from a coal mining perspective, and mostly the discussions are limited to eastern states, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, possibly Orissa, West Bengal. And I'm sure there are elements of transition which appeal to all the states, and possibly that conversation needs to be advanced a little bit ahead. And my last point is that in the end, energy has been covered. In the end, there is a rapid increase in the way journalists are covering energy. This is more general, but we had analyzed, and some others had analyzed as well, on how Economic Times has covered climate over the last 15 years or so. And, the findings are quite detailed, because what you can actually see is about 10, 12 years back, there was not much coverage on the social cost of carbon. And suddenly in the last 4 or 5 years, in a paper like Economic Times, you see a lot of coverage on what the social cost of carbon is. There was not a lot of coverage on issues around technology and innovation, like battery storage and, new technologies which will come and change the game. But even in a paper like Economic Times, there is a lot more when you talk about how climate and energy are being covered. Apart from, of course, the coverage of how governance of energy is becoming more and more a topic when there is a shared view of most of the reporters to cover about those issues. So I think in the final outcome, I will only say that there is lots in this year that also presents itself as an exciting opportunity. It's a year of G20. Important meetings are already happening. And with the report that you have produced and other elements of how the commitments that have been made at the national level can be translated into a state level, it feels that there is a lot of engagement at the state level that is needed. When we go and work with journalists at the state level, as you can imagine, their understanding is very local, their demands are also very local. And you offer them a report which talks about India's NDCs and 450 gigawatts of target, and there is nothing in the middle that explains to them either the journey or that explains to them how the financing will happen, how the revenue will be shared, what will be the benefits that will come to the state to be doing this. And I think some of those breakdown elements of how rapid clean energy transition will also be of more relevance at the local level will be useful. Otherwise, local news will always be about discoms being cash-strapped and financial unviability, and making it to the city page of the English paper in every edition. And we've seen that for many years. I will pause.
Thanks, Aarti, for bringing in the social factor as well. So definitely transition cannot be talked about in isolation without considering the aspect of just transition. Though in this study, the focus was to kind of nudge some of the laggards in terms of where they are not performing well and kind of bring in some state level comparison with how different states are faring against each other on different parameters. But definitely, just transition becomes a very critical element when you are working at state. And definitely, I think the way we should be bridging the gap, at central level, a lot gets covered. But when you start working at state, there is definitely more appetite, again, to do more capacity building with especially the journalists who cover these stories. So we would be more than happy to engage. I think the authors, both Aditya and Saloni, would like to take different states. Now I think there was also this question asked whether we have from Joydeep, whether we have reached out to different state departments. We have already reached out to Niti Aayog, ESL. So we are in presenting our report to different stakeholders, and soon we will also be sharing the results with the state departments and the MDs of state discoms and start having a dialogue with them. So it's an ongoing process. It's a 16 state. We could not have managed to do everything by now, but it's going to be a continuous exercise, and we'll be engaging with different states in the coming months. I think since we are towards nearing like closing time, I would want to now pick up a few questions from the audience. Just a quick comment from Mr. Minghani. Thank you, sir, for listening to the session today. And you have also been one of the big pioneers in bringing this transition. So sir has commented that, broad overview of power sector, which was earlier a paid published hard copy version, is now available on CA website since last 2 years. So stakeholders should write their data requirement to CA to improve data delivery. Thank you so much. I think we did identify that there are some gaps over there, and that really gives us some relief to know that, we can reach out to CA for some more data. Thank you for that. And then you also have a question on for RE rich and non-RE rich states. Challenges are different so far as the policy and stranded resources, if the path to electricity transition is followed, are considered. Any suggestions on how to deal with this? Anybody in the panelists who would want to take this up? Shalu, you want to answer? Yeah, yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mikani. Definitely very important questions of our time. The resources, of course, that some of the states have currently and are powering most of the thermal power stations may not be of use sometime later if we are to make this transition. And of course, the question of stranded resources is important, but at the same time, these resources often come with the resource curse, which is where, leading to various health, environmental issues in the local communities. So while, we are in that context talking about just transition, going forward, one of the ways to address this challenge could be to figure out more revenue sharing mechanisms, like resource sharing mechanisms across states. We, of course, don't have very good examples within India on this front at the moment, but this is something that's being discussed. But I'm not answering your question directly, but I do feel the transition pathways themselves will look different for different states. So non-RE states, instead of focusing on, of course, utility scale solar, probably they are better placed to focus on other elements of transition, which is uptake of electric vehicles, for instance, or focusing on demand side management, or which is the first fuel, because they for them, it will make even more sense. And it is possible that may also lead to more, put them in a better place to provide the kind of flexibilities that the demand side resources or distributed energy resources, if these states were to capture first, could provide to states which have more utility scale RE, which then could play a complementary role. So that's a brief response, but yeah, happy to be countered here. Thank you.
Thanks, Shalu. Thanks for answering that. Uh, Mr. Ranjan, we also have another question from Vishu Mishra. How does green hydrogen storage and I don't know, CAES fare compared to pumped storage, keeping 10 years in timeline? So bearing that, it's going to stay for 10 years, or how do we see these prices going in the next 10 years for battery storage as well? He has a specific question on, what are the supply? I mean, there are challenges when it comes to supply chain, especially the lithium ion battery for the lithium ion batteries.
So definitely. So the first thing to add to what Shalu said, the energy transition roadmap for all the states, whether they are RE rich or non-RE rich, has to be two ways. One is top-driven approach, and the other is bottoms-up approach. So the bottoms-up approach is nothing but what Shalu said about DER integration, promoting electric vehicles, energy efficiency, etc. The top-down approach is where you green your portfolio. So whether that portfolio, that plant may not be lying within your state boundary, it may be lying somewhere else. But as we know, the entire earth is connected. So if you are promoting that, you are promoting green for everybody, including yourself. So now coming to this question, he's talking about green hydrogen and compressed air energy storage, CAES, as well as the role of the same in decarbonization and goals on the same. So if you talk about very recently, our government has come out with the National Green Hydrogen Mission. And currently the rates would be hovering around, say, $3.5 per kg kind of, which as per the NSGM, we want to have a lot of savings by, say, 2030. We may intend to reach a figure of below $2 per kg kind of figure for generation of the green hydrogen. And not only green hydrogen, talking about green ammonia as well. Now, the thing is, this depends upon how we are able to merge these two objectives. What are the objectives? When you create a RE solution for the states from the perspective of electricity solution, you are anyway generating a lot of power which may not be fitting in the construct of that particular state's demand portfolio. So how you can create another source of flexibility, which is in this case, it is called sectoral flexibility or sector coupling, where you arrive at a power, say, for example, I can take some numbers, maybe 2.5 rupees a unit for this green hydrogen, which is going to give a lot of impetus to that set goal of less than $2 per kg kind of figure, because the green power input cost is a very important cost. Now, this is going to play a very important role. I was going through one of the articles also very recently where the flexibility in the electrolyzers are being utilized for RE integration. So some of the PEM electrolyzers can flex down up to 30% of their rated capacity in the real time without impacting their output or reliability. So just looking at these and integrating them is also very, very important. And then this sector coupling becomes a very important part of the resource adequacy that needs to be looked into. Compressed air energy storage is a relatively new area for a country like India. Some of the areas, they are being scouted for some POCs, like, for example, you have underground coal mines, which are now abundant, which are being scouted for such kind of technologies. Some of the companies, I think, like Gravitricity, and there are many other companies who are trying to look at. But then if you ask me what are the price points, whether it will be attaining grid parity near soon, I'm not very sure in terms of India, because this also has an impact on the seismicity impact on the seismicity of that particular area wherever it is being going to be deployed, because this is underground. Compressed air energy storage is underground flywheel kind of construct, if I understand his question very correctly. Now, talking about the battery chemistry part, battery chemistry part, there are a lot of things which are happening. Important thing which I would like to point out is the secondary life value chain needs to be established from the vehicular batteries to the stationary battery. Recently, there was a tie-up by, I think, Mercedes-Benz with one of the companies to utilize Mercedes electric vehicle batteries as a stationary storage part for the grid. So that chain needs to be integrated, and that is also going to bring down the LCOE for the energy storage when used as an energy construct or even as an ancillary construct. Vibhuti.
Great, thank you. That brings us close to the discussion. Joydeep, one last question I'm going to pick up from you, which is not so relevant to this study, but yes, quickly on responding to it. There are a lot of studies being undertaken for helping the coal-rich states to transition. I particularly myself gonna be involved in this work in Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh along with other CSOs like Swaniti, IEEFA. So there's a lot of work happening. We don't have the answers ready yet, but that work is being undertaken to help the state budgeting specifically to help these states transition away from coal revenue to look at other revenue streams that can bridge that gap. And more importantly, helping states, raise finance from different sources to, again, finance the transition and not just rely on public source of money. So with that, we will bring this session to a close. Thank you to the authors of the report who have answered most of the questions in writing. Hopefully, if there are any more questions, feel free to reach out to any of the panelists or the authors. And thank you once again to all the panelists for sharing their insights. It's been a very, very wonderful discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.